Hi everyone. Thanks for bearing with me on this. Like Mo said, I don't have a construction or engineering or architecture background, so I'm here to share some things that I've seen across a variety of industries. And to be honest, because I've worked across so many different sectors, I'm trying to focus on the things that are not sector specific. Because anytime I go and have a conversation with someone in an industry I've not worked in, or at least it's different to my main focus, I always hear, oh, we're different to all the other places you've worked at. And then we start having conversations and working together. And I realize, no, the pattern, a lot of the patterns very much do stick true, regardless of whether we're talking about digital first companies or physical first companies, companies that have been around for a long time, companies that are big, that are small, and so on. But before I get into all of that, a little bit about who I am. It's like Mo said, I've been working at a kind of the intersection of a bunch of different areas that have mostly been that have all revolved around data and AI in one way or another. I'll show you just a few of the logos of the companies that I've either worked for, worked with, helped train or deliver projects for that you might recognize. And most recently, I was at CK Delta, a company that's part of a large conglomerate owning a lot of the companies that are in the logos above, as well as a bunch of others, where I was the head of data and AI products for them. But now I have my own company where I'm kind of taking what I've learned over the last decade in helping organizations, not so much with the technical implementation of data management, information management, building advanced analytics and AI, but more all the non-technical things involved. And that's kind of what I'm going to be talking about today. I've kind of structured this presentation in three parts. The first I've called inspiration. We'll talk about what's worked really well across different industries in terms of getting commercial value out of data and information. Then the challenge of why that is still an outlier in terms of stories and why it's really hard for a lot of businesses to do it. And then how do we make sure that we can be part of the success stories and not the challenge stories? So to start with, very simple kind of classification of the three ways in which businesses create value using their data and information. The first is the simple efficiency play. I've got a particular operation that I want to make go faster, make go cheaper, make go without needing as many people or without having as much risk involved. And we use data to either automate or make a process more smart in order to achieve that efficiency. Secondly, when we want to grow our top line figures, get more customers, bring in more revenue, and so on. And then lastly, and the more transformational type is when we unlock a new revenue stream, new business models through the innovation that can happen through data and its applications. So I'll give some examples of all three of these because I appreciate this is quite wishy-washy and high level. So to start with internal efficiencies, I've picked an example from shipping. And these kind of plays, they're the most common that you see. Often they tend to be also the easiest for an internal data department or IT department to deliver. And they can have huge impact, but very often I see them playing kind of at the margins. Let's make this from 96% to 97%, but it's still worth talking about. So shipping industry example. When it comes to things like container ships and fuel tankers, the fuel that ship burns makes up the majority of its voyage cost. So it's a pretty big part. Like, yeah, you need to pay for maintenance and for your crews and for parking at different ports, but actually the bunker fuel ends up being your biggest expense, especially for the larger vessels. So if we take Maersk as an example, what they did is they took data that they by and large had already, like the continuous GPS logs that the ship is kind of sharing its location as it travels, all the onboard IoT sensors in the engines and in other parts of the ship, as well as its historical performance and fuel consumption. And they used all that to create a digital twin that worked in real time to give them an understanding of what actually is happening in each vessel, but also to figure out what would the optimal way of burning fuel and getting from A to B look like. And so what they did is they now have their operational teams continuously comparing that optimum number versus reality and make constant course corrections that ultimately feel very small, but when you add up the little improvements that you can get every single day, every single hour, you end up reducing your fuel costs by 3 to 5%. That also makes you're saving money, but also you're saving on the emissions that you're making. And when you add that up on their fleet of 700 plus vessels, is a pretty big number. So that's a simple example, though it took them some time to build, of how you can keep everything else the same. Like the ship still gets from A to B, it still carries the same number of containers, um, but it just gets to be a little bit more efficient. And that little bit more efficiency can be tens of thousands or tens of millions of dollars that you get to save every year that you can then reinvest into other things or just keep as higher profit. Second type, top line growth. I'll give you an example from my past with PepsiCo. So in the consumer goods industry, you have companies like PepsiCo and Unilever that send out sales reps to visit their either supermarkets or smaller retail stores to say either to sell new products or to say, hey, why don't you stock more of my stuff in these shelves or put them in a better place or just remind them that they're overdue for renewing their orders. And they're constantly going after their clients, but it's not like every sales rep can go and see every single customer every single day. They're driving around the country, prioritizing based on who is the biggest client, who needs to be visited more frequently. And what we did at PepsiCo, and what I know a lot of other consumer goods companies have done, is we built what we called Store DNA. And the idea was, let's take all of the data we have about our customers. So it might be our sales data, it might be about how often we visited them, who visits them, it might be about the kind of coolers or racks we've got installed there, our market share compared to competitors, but also a lot of data that's external, either external that we had to buy, like footfall data to understand how many people are going around different locations, as well as open source data, like stuff from the census or from OpenStreetMap to understand, okay, are there schools nearby? Are there parks nearby each of the tens of thousands of customers that a company like PepsiCo has? And then off the back of that, you can build a bunch of different analytical use cases. And in our case, the guiding point was how can we improve our commercial sales strategy and our go-to-market strategy? And so there's a bunch of different use cases that over time got built up, but the one we started with was very simple. We asked, what if instead of visiting customers based on their size, so I'm doing 100K on this customer, I'm going to go more frequently than the customer I'm selling 10K a month to. Instead, we were able to predict how much we could sell to that customer. And so by doing that, which is just change the order in which a sales rep goes to visit different customers, in every country that we would go live with Store DNA, we'd grow sales by 10 to 20%. And that's something that it would only take a few months to kind of bring all the data together for each country, because in each country you have different systems, different go-to-market models, different data, but we could still build something reasonably repeatable. And then because it was also simple, we didn't need to do a huge transformation to change how the sales team works. And so every few months, as you'd go live into a new country, bam, you're growing your sales by a huge number without having to grow your sales team, without having to burn more fuel or give them bigger discounts. You're just paying for some data scientists to do some of that the data work largely once, and then it's live after that. Then lastly, on the more transformational side, you might have heard that, or we use the term data commercialization or data monetization. And the idea is, how can I generate value directly out of my data? Not use the data to make a better decision, like to improve the fuel efficiency of my tankers or to improve the sales efficiency of my sales team, but actually put a direct monetary value on the data itself. And the example I want to give here is from Airbus and their Skywise platform that's been live for, I think, a little under a decade now. And what Skywise is, without going into too much detail, it's a platform where Airbus shares data with its partners, with airports, with airlines, with service management companies, but also where those companies in turn share back their data, because sometimes it's about Airbus using data from the airports or airlines using data um, from a third party. And so, and on top of that, there's a bunch of kind of pre-built analytical use cases that if I'm an airline and I sign on to Skywise, I start receiving data, I start sharing data, but also I get access to things that Airbus or its partners have built, like predictive maintenance algorithms. And so when we look at, first of all, what is the benefit to those partners, not to Airbus themselves, you have, and these figures are 5 years old, so I'm sure they are much bigger now, but nearly $2 billion in annual savings for the airlines or for the airports because they have access to things like predictive maintenance, thanks to the data that maybe they don't have, but Airbus is able to share with them, or improving their handoffs or optimizing fuel consumption, optimizing which routes they should be serving, and being able to compare themselves against the industry. And so it's become hugely valuable to the airlines, and that's why Airbus was able to sign on so many airlines to do this kind of data sharing really quickly. I think in just the first 12 months, they had 22 airlines, which is pretty impressive given the complexity that comes with both in terms of the commercials agreeing to do that kind of data sharing, but also then being able to actually make it work on the technical side of things. Because a lot of this is real-time data. It's not just we're going to send you some Excel sheets once a year and you can give access to those Excel sheets to other people. But then when it comes to how this has benefited Airbus, right? Again, keeping in mind that these numbers are a bit old and Skywise has since grown significantly, they were making nearly $1 million a year in terms of additional services they were able to sell through Skywise or the monetization of Skywise itself. And that's on top of the more indirect, but still extremely important benefits, like your customers are now more sticky. Like, granted, maybe Boeing's not been giving Airbus the best competition lately, but still, the switching cost of going from Airbus for your fleet to Boeing or someone else is now much higher because suddenly, okay, now I'm relying on Skywise for my predictive maintenance. If I were to switch to Boeing, we would have to figure out a new way to do predictive maintenance or to stop saving a lot of money from it and deal with much less reliable planes that break more often instead of being, constantly up. And on top of that, Airbus is able to get much richer feedback from the airports, from the airlines about how its products are doing, about how the planes are doing, so that when it comes to building the next generation of planes, they can have that competitive advantage from all the information that they get. So it's not just we're going to do some data sharing because it'll help us collaborate better or because it's a marketing exercise. Like, there's huge amounts of revenue that are coming in, either directly because of the data sharing agreements in place or indirectly because it makes the Airbus proposition more attractive compared to competitors. I'll give one more example on data commercialization, just to show the breadth of it, but also because I think some of it is really relevant to the construction industry. If we go back to consumer goods and retail, I want to talk about Carrefour. So a bit of context for you to understand how the industry works. Historically, companies like Pepsi and Unilever and Procter and Gamble would share data with their retailers, with their customers, to help them decide, okay, you should buy these products because we have a projection that they're going to do this well, or because your competitors were able to sell this much more volume with our low alcohol beers. So if you start stocking it too, you'll be able to reach similar revenue numbers. And over time, what happened was it started going in the other direction as well. Or actually, because more and more companies wanted to be data-driven, including all the companies like the PepsiCos of the world, they wanted to get data from the retailer to understand, for example, from your loyalty cards, who's actually buying my products. Because if I'm PepsiCo, I don't have a direct relationship with my client. It's with my consumer, it's the retailer that does. And so you had these really expensive intermediaries like Nielsen and IRI that both sides would be paying a lot of money to, one to kind of sell it on to the consumer goods company, and then the other to provide it. And what Carrefour did, and they're not the only ones, but they're the biggest and best example, at least in Europe, is they built the Carrefour Links platform, saying we've got the largest data lake with retail data in Europe, consumption data, data that can be used for marketing, and make it really easy for both the consumer goods suppliers like PepsiCo and Unilever, but also marketing agencies to be data driven and to use the data that Carrefour has, which is it's useful to Carrefour as well. Like they've been using it for years to have better marketing and better planning for their stores, but it's also really useful to other people. And up until now, the way that data was being shared was either you pay a ton of money to Nielsen for them to do it on your behalf, or you have a much worse form of data sharing because you're just kind of like, okay, fine, we'll give them some data, send someone over to do it, but it wasn't as professionalized and mature as a function, in part because it wasn't a revenue generator. But now with links, it brings in hundreds of millions of euros per year, right? That's a significant percentage of Carrefour's global revenue. And also, it makes it easier for them to negotiate against these big players because they're like, okay, I want a better price because as part of that, you're going to get access to my data. Or I want you to pay for my Carrefour Link subscription if you want me to stock Pepsi instead of Coke or more Pepsi instead of more Coke. So it's really improved their bargaining position, but also given them the funds that they need in order to invest in a better data offering for their partners. Because at the end of the day, if their suppliers do well, they themselves do well too. Like if Pepsi has more data to make better product R&D decisions or to market its products better, well, where are you going to buy it? You're going to go to the store and buy it, so it's going to grow Carrefour sales as well. I know you might be thinking as I've talked through all these examples, yeah, but these are other sectors. They're not construction. Like, someone like Pepsi, you're building millions of products every year. You're shipping them out. It's not a multi-year thing to build a can of Pepsi. Even with Airbus, you're still building many of the same plane constantly. It's not these big, complex one-off projects that you have to do in construction. But let me point you to the things that are similar in the sectors that I've mentioned and AEC. The first is that you're looking at non-digital, i.e. physical, and very capital-heavy industries, where data doesn't naturally get collected in the way that if I have a website, I can collect a bunch of data about how my users are accessing. If I've got a video game, the data gets generated as people play. Secondly, the core bit of the business is not digital related and it's not data related, right? Airbus builds planes. That's their main thing. It's not generating data that can be used for predictive maintenance. Pepsi builds physical goods and so on and so forth. The third thing is they are companies that have been around for a while. They are companies that have been the product of a bunch of M&A over the years, which means you have a lot of processes and technology that are very old, but also that are very inconsistent. Like within PepsiCo, we didn't have the one sales system or the one finance system. In every country, there'd be something slightly different. And often in every country, you might have multiple, let's say, sales or CRM systems because half of like the beverages side was run in one way, the snack side was run another, or another company that was acquired is still left on its own platform. And so the many complexities of having to deal with that instead of the luxury that a more new company that's digital native just gets to build a nice data platform from scratch is not something that these companies had to begin with. And also, they're part of a long and broad ecosystem, right? Airbus does not build planes end to end. They have a whole bunch of OEMs and subcontractors that build different components. Airbus is the one doing the assembly, and obviously the final part of the value delivery is handled by the airports and the airlines and all the other players in the aviation industry, right? Same with the other companies I gave as examples. And so what that means is the data that each of those players has is valuable to themselves to improve their own operations. For example, like Maersk, they can improve the fuel efficiency of their vessels. But that same data is also really valuable to their partners, to their customers, to the other companies that they interact with. And that's kind of at the core, not just of the commercialization use case that usually happens near the end, but also in terms of what you might need to do to improve your own efficiency. Maybe it's about using data that's coming off the back of a partner, not just your own. Um, and yeah, for me, these are all the kind of really important similarities to keep in mind, and to start asking questions like, what is it among the information that we have today that we could use either to improve our efficiency, to grow the top line, or that might not just be useful to us, but to partners as well. And in many cases, it might be that by commercializing the way the data is being shared, you're actually being able to increase the value of what you can offer quite significantly. The other thing, I don't want to kind of talk through these other examples, but there's a lot of other examples I want to mention, or that I could mention. The one I want to comment on is, you remember the Maersk use case I mentioned earlier about fuel optimization? Well, it didn't just help improve their business. Actually, because it was so successful, it's now been spun off into a separate business. And very often that's the journey of maturity that things can take, that something starts as, okay, we're going to use this to improve just our own operations. And over time, as the quality becomes more reliable, as our governance processes are more robust, suddenly we can start opening up these things up externally. Because maybe when I'm sharing data with colleagues, it's okay if the system goes down one day, they'll be pissed off, but it's all right, they're not going to sue me. Whereas with external data sharing agreements, when people are literally paying money for the data you're providing, you usually need to provide a higher uptime and reliability, greater governance, but also greater prevention of potential issues. Right? And I'm mentioning these other two just so you see other examples of companies that have historically not focused on things that are in any way service or digital related, but now they have that as part of their work. Right? Like Rolls-Royce no longer just sells engines, they sell engine uptime or plane uptime, because they have their own advanced digital twins that are based on the data that's collected in their engines. And so that's the promise that they can offer to their aviation partners. At 3, which is a company owned by my former employer, one of the things we did was take a lot of data coming out of the cell towers and generate anonymized footfall data that we could then sell for a variety of use cases, including companies like PepsiCo that need that footfall data for their own planning. And over time, these are things that end up paying for themselves, and not just paying for themselves, but also pay and greatly increase the profitability of the companies that generate all this data and might use it internally, but also there's a lot of other folks in the broader ecosystem that can benefit from it. So all of that is the kind of success story, things going well, making money out of our data. But why is it that these are still rare, and why in so many businesses this is not the story that typically happens, right? Because if we look at, for example, what's happening right now with the adoption of AI, still 80% of AI projects are failing. And so you end up wasting billions, if not more of dollars across all sorts of industries. But this is not new, right? It's not, oh, it's because AI is a buzzword, there's hype and all that, right? If we go back 10 years ago, the same story was more or less true with digital transformation projects, where about 2/3 of them were failing. If I go even further back to 2012, again, if you look at these percentages, depending on the size of the project, still somewhere between 70 and 80% of the projects were ending up in failure. And that failure there means running greatly over time and budget, or it means we just had to drop it altogether, or we just failed to achieve the outcome we were trying to drive with that project. And we can go further back. I think this article is from 2000, and there's research from earlier back in general, because there's a lot of change involved in these kind of initiatives. That ends up being really hard and ends up being unsuccessful. And so why does this happen, right? Why is it that for most companies, when they're trying to even aiming to get commercial value out of their information, they still end up not succeeding, right? A few years ago, you could have given me a lot of technical excuses and they would have been valid. But in the kind of couple decades since, we don't need to, for example, build and run our own data centers. And we have, in general, really mature technology and infrastructure to store, process, share, govern our data. there's a lot of proven examples. It's no longer the Wild West of we're all just figuring it out and we don't yet know what we can achieve with this information, but we're trying anyway. We also have a lot of talent, right? 10 years ago, data scientists were called unicorns because they were so hard to find. There were so few of them. But now there's so many people that have the right skills to analyze data, to govern the way we move it from A to B, to govern the way we build successful and scalable data platforms, and so on. We also have a lot of really well-funded, if not overfunded startups that get to plug the gaps. So maybe things that Microsoft isn't offering today, there's going to be a startup offering a software as a service product for it. And over time, Microsoft either buys them out or develops their own version of it. And we've got lots of research and lessons, both from academia as well as consultancies on what works and what doesn't, how to approach things, how to not do it. And yet the line on the left is still true, right? There's too many companies that still don't make a positive return on their data investment. They spend millions hiring data scientists, building data platforms, having all these data governance initiatives, and still the return is not there. And for me, the answer as to why this keeps happening is not technical, right? It's, or at least not anymore technical. It's more about the soft and squishy side of human beings and the decisions we do or don't make. I've kind of summarized the key challenges in this like 3-step pyramid. Starting at the bottom, and most importantly, it's working on the right things. So far too often, we invest in our data, in our information, building platforms, engaging in data sharing agreements, having long and complicated data governance work streams, but ultimately they're focused on the wrong things because we've not thought about what is the most important and what is the most high value problem we could be solving, right? Maersk did really well because they realized that the majority of their cost was in fuel efficiency, not in, for example, optimizing their labor staffing rotas because their labor cost was much smaller than the cost of fuel. And that might seem in retrospect really obvious, but it's that really obvious thing that I've seen so many businesses not do. Instead, you jump on something because a vendor's recommended it, or because you want to do something with AI or with data. You want to become data-driven. You find something and you go ahead and deliver it. Or, even more common, I've seen so many data teams have a build it and they will come mentality. Oh, we're going to build our data lake. We're going to build our data foundations, and then we'll figure out what to do with it. And that is the wrong way to do it, right? You need to start with the value first, and then start building it out. And then if you want to expand, if you want to build foundations for other use cases that are not fuel efficiency, by all means do it, but do it gradually, not try and do it all in one go. And that's the second part about prioritization and coordination, right? It's if you're trying to do 100 things at the same time, if you have 12 data scientists and they're each working on 3 separate projects, it's very unlikely that you're going to hit that magic use case and do a good job at it. And then lastly, the other thing that tends to fail quite often is around execution and adoption. So it's super common that something gets built, and it might even be the right thing for the right use case, but then where it fails is no one's using it. Oh, we've really simplified the way we make data accessible. We've built these amazing dashboards. The kind of leadership is on board, but no one's using them. That's the other thing that I see all the time. No one's using it either because you've not trained people or helped instill change, or because you've actually built the wrong thing. Like if your users are going to be accessing the dashboard from their phones, and you've built the dashboard from your 30-inch monitor, there's a good chance that what you've built is not fit for purpose. And that's the other thing I wanted to show. So in terms of, okay, how do we move beyond this? Well, the first thing is, and this is where I kind of use the jargon from outside the industry of data product management. It describes the way of thinking about these technical disciplines like data and analytics and AI and information management, not from a technology point of view, but from a customer need point of view. That's why we call it product management, as if it's a product that we go out and sell to an end customer. And at its core, it's about thinking about what we call the 4 risks of value. The first, and the one that often technical teams think about the most, is feasibility. Can we build this thing? Do we have the right information? Do we have the right skills? Can we deliver it to time and to budgets? But then really importantly, what is the value to the end customer, right? So to use the Maersk analogy again, is this the most important thing, the most important driver of our costs, or should we be worrying about something else instead? Is it worth us committing money to it? Then thirdly, it's about business viability. So are we actually going to save more money by optimizing our fuel consumption? Or is this going to take a massive team of super expensive data scientists 3 years to build? And so by the time we've built the fuel optimization model, actually we'll have spent more money on it. Or other times, especially with AI now, it might be that we'll make a profit out of it, but it might not be legal. We might have compliance issues. We might have risks issues. It might not align with our broader strategy. And then lastly, kind of leaning on the example I gave with you might be using a smartphone, but someone's built it for desktop use. Is this actually valuable to the user? Is it usable for the user? Have you considered the user experience? And when you do kind of consider these 4 dimensions, well, that's when you're in the sweet spot for innovation and transformation. But when you don't is when you end up getting a whole bunch of headaches, right? Like if we've identified the perfect, most profitable solution, but not consulted the technical experts, and so it's physically not possible to build, well, then you can't deliver it. Similarly, if you've not considered the user in terms of building training, creating a smooth user experience, thinking about their needs, well, then it's not going to get adopted. If you've not thought about the profitability side of things, it might be all amazing, but it's not going to pay for itself, which sometimes is fine because we're making an innovation bet. But by and large, we need our initiatives to pay for themselves. And then lastly, if it's great for the user, we somehow think it's going to be profitable for us, we have the technical resources to build it, but it's not actually solving a valuable enough problem, well, then it's kind of a waste of time. It's not fit for purpose. And it gets even worse when we don't consider, if we hit only 1 or 2 of these dimensions. But I'm not gonna talk through it, just conscious of time. So yeah, I wanted to share this slide to say that because more and more companies are realizing that the missing kind of piece of the puzzle or of the equation is not, oh, we need to hire more data people or we need to buy yet another software as a service tool, but it's actually putting someone in charge of that commercial outcome. And often that's called a data product manager, a data product owner, but in different industries, there's more industry-specific terms as well. And so if you look at just in the last 3 years, the number of those people has grown by more than double. And it's why, honestly, it's why I quit my job to start my own company and help companies adopt this way of thinking and train more people to act like data product managers, because it's such an important, but so far missing piece of the puzzle, at least in so many companies and so many industries. And to kind of close things off, for me, being value centric is not just about saying, oh, that means we need to have someone that has the job title, data product manager, just hire someone that's done that job before, right? That's when you end up just kind of painting over the problem and sweeping it under the rug instead of actually solving for what you need to do. For me, the way I think about it and the way I explain what I do or what I used to do as a data product manager and what the point of that role and way of thinking is I say, look, I make sure that all of our really expensive data scientists, data engineers, data governance professional, whatever each company has, are actually working on the right things and are delivering a positive return on investment back to the business. And it's deliberately vague, right? It's not, oh, I focus on implementing this process or this framework, because what it looks like in each company, depending on which of those 3 buckets that I talked about you might be in, and depending on what exactly is the problem you're trying to solve, the tasks I have to do on a day-to-day basis are super different. But at the end of the day, it's about making sure that there's someone there that thinks about that positive return on investment and does whatever is necessary in order to achieve it. And sometimes that's going to be about doubling down on governance. Other times it's going to be doubling down on user experience. Other times it's going to be more about focusing on kind of training and having internal champions to ensure adoption. But ultimately, you're thinking about the end result, not a specific tech, especially technical activity. And that's it. If you want to connect, I've left a QR code that you can use to kind of, find out more about me. I think in it, I've got a couple of resources that you can access. And yeah, I'll shut up. Thanks for having me.